Welcome to In Dark Places. I'm loving it. You might have heard about all the truck drivers out fighting for our freedom right about now. Or maybe you didn't hear about it because you're not going to see it on the mainstream media. And most people listen to the mainstream media. So this week, in honor of our brave fighting truckers, we're going to do some trucker tales of terror. Hey, I wonder what's going on over in the cryptid corner.
This is Mr. Haunted with this week's Cryptid Corner. This week, we learn about the orang pendek. You know, that sounds like a name you'd call somebody in school. Mom, Lucy called me an orange pendek. Well, it's also known as the uhang pandak and several other similar translations. It's said to be a bipedal, ape living in the jungles on the island of Sumatra. Its reported height is commonly between 3 to 5 feet, and its fur is short and typically gray or black, but sometimes reddish or honey-colored. The name orange pendek translates to short person in Indonesian. The creature is said to walk upright on both legs and be omnivorous, which is common with primates. However, unlike most primates, it is reported to spend all of its time on the ground, which is similar among gorillas and other Bigfoot-like cryptids. The orange pendek is said by the Carinci villagers to possess marvelous strength, enough so to uproot small trees and break rattan vines. The orange pendek fella is said to often raid fields for their crops, especially potatoes and fruits. Natives of the island claim the creature has a taste for the Asian durian fruit. The UK-based Centre for Fortean Zoology has taken 5 expeditions to Sumatra in search of the orange pendek. They have found hair and tracks, heard vocalizations, and in 2009 had a sighting. The shape of the animal's footprints in a recent hair analysis by Copenhagen University suggests that the orange pendek is a new species or upright ground-dwelling orangutan. So be on the lookout for this fella. And it's funny because I bit my tongue the other day and it hurt so bad on the side that I can't say S's. If you listen back to this, all my S's. Ow! Cryptid Corner. Thank you.
Oh no, your poor S's. You know what? We've also got some news. Man claims to have had terrifying encounter with Bigfoot while snowboarding in the Rockies. By Douglas Charles. Thanks, Douglas. A man from Northumberland in the United Kingdom says he had a heart-pounding encounter with Bigfoot while visiting America in 2007 for a vacation in the Rockies. I have traveled abroad many times visiting areas ideal for snowboarding, he tells Phantoms and Monsters. I have been to the Alps several times, and I have also been to the Canadian Rockies too. On this particular occasion, he, his friend, and his friend's girlfriend had driven up the back of a remote mountain range and taken a snowmobile further up the mountain for some illegal snowboarding. Please note, don't do illegal snowboarding, it's illegal. At around 5 p.m., we decided it was time to get off the mountain before it went dark, he explained. My mate decided he was going to take me back halfway to the truck first and then return for his lady, and I could make my way to the truck using my board and wait there for them both. And we got about halfway back to the truck in about 15 minutes, and he stopped to let me off. He said to just board back to the truck and he'd go back and get his girlfriend. As he began heading down the path the snowmobile used, he noticed someone walking up toward him about a quarter of a mile away. At first I thought it was a bear.
It was big, and it was moving quickly. Whatever I was seeing moved with a slope of a walk, and I soon realized it wasn't a bear. I thought it looked like a big man wearing a large overcoat with the collar turned up.
He continued.
The individual suddenly took a 45-degree turn to the right and walked into the snowfield toward the trees. He didn't slow down despite walking through 3 feet of snow, something which would have almost stopped me dead in my tracks. The moon was shining from behind this thing, so I didn't see any detail in front of it due to the light shielding its features. At the time, I didn't hear or smell anything. This thing was big, though, but it would be hard to gauge its exact dimensions from the distance between us. I had only been stopped for about a minute, but it seemed like an hour standing there. Still shaking, I decided it was do or die, and I pointed the snowboard right down the track and went as fast as possible.
To this day, he still has no idea exactly what he had encountered that day in the Rockies, but it certainly sounds like he almost came face to face with a Bigfoot. You think?
Some Bigfoot news. We are approaching the 38th anniversary of a most significant police Bigfoot encounter in Whitehall, New York. Back in February of 1982, Dan Gordon and another police officer encountered an unknown creature cross the road in front of their police cruiser. They were traveling along Route 22 at about 4:30 a.m. The creature was described as 7 to 8 feet tall, dark in color, walking upright on 2 legs and being slightly hunched over, with long swinging arms. The creature traversed the 2-lane highway in only 3 steps. This encounter is one of the most credible when years later, Gordon passed a polygraph examination showing no signs of deception. Years later, the late Dan Gordon and the anonymous police officer brought me to the exact location of their encounter. Dan maintained his anonymous status for over 20 years before publicly appearing on multiple television spots. Anyone with more information about this or other encounters, please feel free to contact bfyeti1 at yahoo.com. That's bfyeti1 at yahoo.com. And thanks to UFO Fred for that story.
Thank you, Jimmy Haunted. And now here is the Nicolas Cage Meltdown of the Week.
Who am I kidding? This is not Susan Orlean's story. I have no connection with her. I can't even meet her. I can't meet anyone.
I have no understanding of anything outside of my own panic and self-loathing and pathetic little existence. It's like the only thing I'm actually qualified to write about is myself and my own self.
Thanks, Nick. In honor of our brave truckers out there getting her done, we have some trucker tales of terror.
I have a trucker story for you from the extended family. An uncle used to drive a lot, and he always came back with the weirdest stories ever. All the family members knew his stories, but there was one particular story he told me and warned me about. I was about 6 years old or so. The moral of the story is never stay in the desert alone at night. It seems once he had a drive to Chile. He had a contract, and how do you freaking drive to Chile? Is it like a boat or a plane? I don't know. Where you headed? Chile? He had a contract, and the way there was okay. Whenever he was done, he usually spent a few bucks on booze. But this time, due to a family gathering, he wanted to come back as soon as possible. So instead of drinking in some bar, he decided to sleep a bit in the Atacama Desert. Well, it's a desert, and he had parked way outside the road and a few miles before the next village. He sleeps and wakes up to someone singing. He's confused and thinks it's the radio, but the radio is not on. Then the singing stops, and it sounds more like a scream of help. That's when he wants to get out and help, but he's confused. He said he started the motor and the lights to see where and who was there. He also did open the window a bit and yelled, asking what happened. It was nothing, and right when he decided to get out anyway, he catches a movement in the corner of where the lights end. It looked like a woman, but the face was pitch dark. He freaks out and drives away, non-stop until he reached home. Whatever he saw or thought he saw, every time he told the story, his face goes pale. Even my grandma commented on how he was usually a very jolly guy, and whatever happened to him in the Atacama Desert totally freaked him out.
This story comes from SasquatchChronicles.com. Thanks, Wes. Daniel Perez contacted informant 35-year-old Travis Culver from Brookings, Oregon. Perez notes that Culver himself is 6 feet 7 inches tall. On Highway 199 in Del Norte County, Northern California, on September 22nd, it doesn't say what year this is, at about 5:30 a.m. during a routine drive, Travis Culver noted, "It was still dark outside, and I was driving along. I reached down to grab my lunch, and when I looked back up, there it was, a big hairy monster standing next to a yellow road sign." Mr. Culver told Perez he was driving a conventional truck and was going about his business as a trucker, heading northbound on Highway 199 toward Oregon at the time. Based on the road sign and further investigation, the head of the Bigfoot appeared parallel to the steering wheel. Mr. Culver estimated that the size of the subject at 8 feet 3 inches tall. He remarked to Perez on the phone, "He was so thick, maybe 800 pounds or so, 3 or 4 feet thick." Daniel Perez asked the informant if he thought it could have been a costumed man, and Culver replied, "There's no way." He asked if he was scared, and Culver replied, "Yeah." And when Culver reported the incident, he told Perez he was talking 90 miles per hour. Pretty fast. Mr. Culver told the Brookings, Oregon Curry Coastal Pilot newspaper that he raised its arm to block the beam of my headlights. I've never seen anything like it.
Like most people here, this didn't happen to me. One of my good friends from middle school had a stepfather who was a truck driver. He was a tough son of a bum, except this one time when he told us he stopped driving trucks. He was on a long trip from somewhere down in Texas to Boise, Idaho. By the time he hit the freeway close to Boise, he had already been up for 24 hours. Either way, I don't believe he could have seen this coming. Outside of Boise, he was driving late at night at the fastest legal speed when out of nowhere, he sees someone sit straight up in the middle of the road. He didn't have enough time to even hit the brakes. Not that it would have helped. She was decapitated on the spot. He later found out she was tweaked out. I don't think even if he wasn't sleep deprived, he would have seen her laying in the road like that. From what the police can gather, she walked out there, sat down, and eventually fell asleep in the road. No one knows who she was or how she got that far out. Not paranormal, but scary.
This is another story from the Sasquatch Chronicles website. I am a long-haul trucker hauling between Washington and Alaska. On the night of the 23rd of March, I was traveling southbound on Highway 37. At approximately 19:30 hours, I stopped at the rest area known as Bell 1 for a dinner break and turned the truck off because the temperature was above freezing. There was absolutely no one in this rest area except for me. I got out of the truck to walk around while my meal was heating and to stretch my legs. I immediately got a strong sense that I was being watched, and the hair on the back of my arms and neck stood up. I walked very fast back to the truck, scanning the area as I walked. As I was getting back into the truck, I heard a sound that sounded like a howl from a distance of about a quarter of a mile away. I have never heard anything like that before in my life. I have been hunting for most of my life and familiar with the sounds of wildlife and the howls of wolves. At this point, I got into the truck and locked the door. I started to eat, and about 3 or 4 minutes later, I heard the howl again, louder and closer this time. It made me very nervous, and I jumped out of the truck and threw my food in the garbage can about 4 steps from the truck. And in turning to the truck to get back in, I heard the third howl, and it sounded like it came from about 300 yards away behind the outhouse. I left there fast without even putting my seatbelt on. I can't have that. I can only describe the sound as being exactly like the Ohio sound on your website. So I'll try to find a link for that and stick it in the description. To me, it was almost like a long, drawn-out moan. The howl started off being in the distance and got closer in a period of about 8 to 10 minutes, with the second howl being the longest of the 3. The third was the loudest. I have stopped at this rest area multiple times and have never encountered this before. It made me very uneasy. I'm not exactly sure what I heard and what was out there. I am an avid hunter in the Pacific Northwest, and never have I had something in the woods cause my hair to stand on end and cause an immediate desire to get out of the area. I can only relate that I have had a large cougar within yards of me in the Idaho Panhandle National Forest, and never felt the fear I felt from this encounter.
My brother was a truck driver in the 90s and early 2000s. He just told me this story a few months ago. He was driving through Pennsylvania on the way back to New Jersey. He pulled over to the side of the road behind 2 other trailers. In the early morning, he heard someone bang on his right door. He quickly jumps from the sleeping compartment and grabs his bat. As he looks out the window, there's no one there. But now there's a bang on the left side. Freaked out, he looks out that window, and there's nothing but silence now. He's trying to figure out what TF is going on. Seconds later, banging on both doors simultaneously. He said the banging was so loud and heavy, the truck was shaking. Both curtains open. He can see there's no one out there. He quickly jumps in the driver's seat and starts the truck. He sees the other 2 trucks ahead of him do the same. He said he felt as if they were all experiencing the same thing.
This one also comes from the Sasquatch Chronicles website. It's a cool website and a cool podcast. Check them out when you get a chance. In July of 1983, I worked for the timber company, driving a 1-ton truck pulling a 1,200-gallon tanker in the Honobia, Pickens area. On a trip back to our facility, a very large hairy creature ran across the road in front of me. I came within a few feet of running over it. It did not stop, it just kept on running. It was approximately 7 feet tall. The upper torso of its body was a brownish color, and the lower was a lighter color. One of the things I particularly noticed was there were no shoes. My first thought was someone's pulling a prank. I soon realized that it couldn't be. Not up here in these mountainous forests. No houses for miles. I was told by phone by a relative that 3 large man-like hairy creatures were observed on a person's porch and yard. The man got his SKS and has allegedly shot at one. My relative also told me that contractors who plant young pine seedlings are refusing to go in near Anobia and plant trees. Today, January 28th, 2000, we have had a very heavy snow, and while I was home listening to the scanner, I overheard a conversation between 2 Oklahoma game wardens talking about the incident. One told the other to be on the lookout for a large man-like hairy creature. They seemed very serious. They were talking about the same incident that I have mentioned above. This area is called the Hanobi Wildlife Area and is very, very sparsely inhabited. The area of about 875,000 acres is owned by a large timber company, and as the loggers move in to cut, there are sightings.
Pulled over for a break on the way to Melbourne from Sydney at a truck stop. No street lights or anything. Pitch black. No other trucks or cars at the stop. I turn off my lights. I switch the truck off. Do the curtains. I lock the truck from both sides. Jump into bed, set my alarm, set my phone above me in the compartment. I was rolling over from side to side for about 5 to 10 minutes. I couldn't get to sleep due to it being prime summer temperatures, reaching around 30 degrees at night. I guess that's Celsius. I'm looking up at the ceiling mentally, planning out the day ahead. Suddenly, the passenger side door opens up slightly. The cabin light turns on. WTF, he says. Now, the truck is fairly a late model and in pristine condition, so there's no question about the door being faulty or anything. I just sat there for what felt like eternity, expecting someone to come up and see me sitting there with the solid bat in my hand that we use for tightening belts. No one came up, nor was there any noise at all, just quiet, eerie silence. I grabbed my torch and jumped down, walked around the truck. No other trucks were around, nor were there any cars. It was just me and my fully loaded double. After around 5 to 10 minutes of getting screwed around with here, I locked up and went to bed again. Woke up the next morning, yawned, fixed myself up along the bed, opened the curtains, and holy mackerels, there's a cemetery next to the stop where I parked. Couldn't see it at night because it was so dark. Hunger and laziness all escaped upon realization. Grabbed my keys, didn't even put my shoes on, didn't put my pants on, switched the truck on, and got the F out of there ASAP.
This one comes from another podcast, The Confessionals. Thanks, Tony. Be sure to check out The Confessionals. Good show. My friend drove for a few years a while back. He told me he was driving a rig very late at night in Utah, driving on a lesser used 2-lane highway. He said he remembers feeling very alert that night. So he noticed what appeared to be a figure manifesting up ahead on the dark road. He told me it wasn't on the road, but just next to it. He then comes to a stop and grabs his heavy-duty flashlight and points it at the figure. He then describes it. Apparently, this humanoid creature had a dead coyote it was eating, and the truck had gotten its attention and made it mad. So it sort of stands up so he can get a full view of the thing. It was gaunt, with very big eyes, and, of course, the coyote blood was all over its face. Its height was about 6 foot 2 inches. It had skinny limbs, no clothing. He then describes how it started to shuffle slowly toward the truck. Not only does he not have a weapon at the time, the only usable weapon being his flashlight is actively helping him view the creature. He decides to book it and leave. Had no problem passing it. Turned around to see it standing in the middle of the road on 2 legs as he drove away. When he reached the nearest rest stop, he saw 2 other truckers talking. Apparently my friend wasn't the only one to see the thing. Both the 2 guys looked as horrified as he was.
My boyfriend is a truck driver who routinely does midnight runs. Oddly enough, I asked him this question myself a few days ago. He told me that one night he was getting ready to park in a lot next to the truck stop. He said it looked like there was no lights, no cars, no signs of anyone, but he said screw it, he was tired. He woke up the next morning, parked on the side of the road with 3 highway patrol vehicles behind him. He was about 15 miles away from the truck stop he parked at. Thing is, he was sleeping in his camper the whole night. He has no idea how he got on the side of the road, and logic says someone tried stealing the truck and succeeded, and the police convinced him of this happening as they saw a man in a black jumpsuit running away from his truck into a nearby field. Even then, he still feels uneasy about the whole situation. Apparently, the doors were still locked from the inside, and there was no real sign of anyone trying to break in.
This next one is called Encounter with UFO Frightening. By John G. Adney and Reginald E. Mitchell. So this story had to have 2. You know it's going to be good. Thanks, guys. An encounter with an unidentified flying object near Cape Girardeau has left a Greenville truck driver shaken over what he claims he saw in the 2 to 3 minutes before unusual flashing lights disappeared. Eddie Webb, 45, a driver from Sam Tansley Trucking Inc. of Cape Girardeau, claims to have made contact the hard way with a UFO. Today, he is the center of attention as UFO sightings become more widespread throughout the area. Mr. Webb was given emergency eye treatment at Southeast Missouri Hospital and further treatment at a Cape Girardeau ophthalmologist office, whatever that is. The State Highway Patrol is holding his twisted, nearly melted pair of eyeglasses as evidence that something unusual happened, although Mr. Webb is the only one to claim that he actually saw what he thinks is a UFO. His wife, Velma May, also a truck driver and who was with him when the incident occurred, says she saw nothing. And the doctor who treated Mr. Webb says he cannot confirm any type of injuries, but Mr. Webb sticks to his story that he was temporarily blinded and burned. His wife believes him, and the Highway Patrol is puzzled. The story he relates seems fantastic, almost unbelievable, but even the UFO skeptics who have seen the eyeglasses frames twisted by a hot flash of unknown origin. Admit, there is something to that story.
My dad was a trucker for many years. One time, he told me he stopped at a mandatory way station somewhere at night that was refurbished from an old train station. My dad parked the truck and got out, noticing that someone was walking along the train tracks with a light. It was really late, so my dad called out and asked if he was okay. The man kept walking. My dad said he had a lantern in his hand. My dad called out again. The man never turned around. He went into the office and told him that some drunk jerk is walking the train tracks, and the guy behind the desk nonchalantly says, "Yeah, was it this guy?" and points to an old picture on the wall. It was a picture of all the rail yard guys from over 70 years before. Sure enough, my dad had seen one of those guys in the photo. Apparently, a lot of people have seen whatever this was and comes in asking questions about the same particular guy. Apart from that story, he has many where he has seen people die, seen bad accidents, and driven past blocked off parts of the road where he can clearly see a white sheet over lots of blood. He once told me a story where he saw a motorcyclist merging onto the freeway, get into an accident with a car, and the cyclist's head just popped right off, helmet and all, and went hurtling through the air. Here's another one. Nothing huge, but once I was stopped by a train in Calumet City, Illinois, probably 2 or 3 a.m., and it's kind of a ghetto area, so I was a little uneasy about being there at that time. The company I was delivering to was at a dead end just after the tracks. Of course, there wasn't anyone around, just me. I sat parked for like 5 minutes waiting for the train, and all of a sudden I heard loud knocking on my door, like very rapidly to get my attention. I have a day cab, so I looked all around the truck, through the windows and mirrors, nobody. The road was wide enough that I would have totally seen someone run away after doing this. I'm sure it was something not on this plane, and I accept that. I'm sure people have been killed in that area at some point in the past. How about this one? I've slept in hundreds of rest areas, parking lots, state and national forests. The spookiest times are things you can't put your finger on, often in the desert. I was outside of Roswell. The colors of the land and night sky just felt strange. Everything had this purple hue. Gave me the chills. That's it? That's your whole story? Well, let's hope this one's a little better. Not a trucker, but a driver from the same company that my dad works for was at a stoplight pulling through a four-way when a car pulled up next to him and shot into the cab of the truck. This truck was pulling a trailer full of fuel. He didn't know what happened until someone told him he was just shot at. The bullet went through the body, but hit the frame of the door at a perfect angle to block it from penetrating the cab. Damn, some of these stories are a lot better than others. This guy says, I slept in my rig on Walton's Mountain, Virginia one night. It wasn't the pitch black darkness that bothered me. It was the sounds coming from it. It wasn't animal noises. I have no idea what it was, but it creeps me out to this day. I know what they were. They were cryptids.
This one has no name or no author, and I don't remember where I got it from. So if this story belongs to you, thank you. I was minding my own business, trying to get some sleep at the Flying J in Ripon, California, off 99, when all of a sudden a something woke me up, and I seen a blinding light coming through the curtain. Thought it was some OO, whatever that is, with them new LED headlights, was backing into a hole, but it was coming from the sky. I pulled on my britches and grabbed my ball-peen hammer just in case and opened the door to take a look. As soon as I opened the door and started to look up to see what it was, it blinked out. I had thought it would have been a police helicopter or something, but it was all quiet and nothing at all was in the sky. I looked around and noticed that everybody was still asleep, so I went back to bed. The next morning at the Denny's, there I was, asking another driver sitting next to me if he ever saw anything weird at night. He looked at me real funny and said he seen a blinking light kinda under his breath, and then he didn't want to talk about it. Well, a waitress come by just then and heard what we was a-talking about. She said that lots of weird stuff was seen in the sky around the truck stop for the past year. It got so bad the girls were too scared to go out to their cars at night without a man going with them. She said some big shot from headquarters gave orders not to discuss it with any customers under the threat of termination. They were more worried about losing business than our safety. So here's the weird thing. She told us she was checking Yelp to see if they got any reviews, and she saw a review of Flying J about a flying saucer parked at the fuel island. She said there was pictures and everything. And this is where it gets weird. Now wait a minute, I thought it already got weird. Get out the tinfoil hats. Okay, already there, dude. So also, she said everybody thinks they might be fake pictures put there by corporate as disinformation to discredit the real UFOs that keep coming over the truck stop and shooting light beams down on the ground. I don't know, but I'm going to the Loves across the street just to be safe. Ever since I got lit up like that, I got a new scar on my neck and get these nosebleeds and a lot of headaches and nightmares that I won't talk about. No lie. I met Rosemary Ellen Galley at the 2014 Mothman Festival. She passed away in 2019. This is a story she told from her book, The Big Book of West Virginia Ghost Stories, which was released in 2014. She told this story at the Mothman Festival, and I recorded the story, which may or may not be illegal, but I was recording it, and it's one of the creepiest stories I've ever heard. So here's Rosemary Ellen Galley telling that story.
Here we have 81, this is Virginia over here, so we're very close to the Virginia border. Here's Seneca Rocks, and here's a little town called Moorhead. Well, this is where a lot of the time and dimension slips take place, and it's right along a U.S. West Virginia State Route 55 going toward 28. And I first came across this with some accounts from truckers who said that they had experienced some very strange Twilight Zone things while driving along 55. And one man I talked to by the name of Larry Eubank said that one day he picked up a load and he was heading this way on 55, and he's driving along, and suddenly the landscape just starts to look different. He's driven this road many times, and suddenly it's not familiar anymore. And he thought, could I have possibly turned off? Did that distracted? Maybe I took a wrong turn somewhere and I'm not on 55 anymore. Well, he keeps going because he thinks, well, he has to. There's only really one major way to get there for his truck. And he said, well, I'll just keep going and hope to pick up Route 28 a little further on. So he drives and drives, and and then the landscape gets weirder and weirder. There's no life in the landscape. There's no telephone poles. There are no road signs, no cars. There's no center line on the road. There's no side lines on the road either. He's the only one on it. No traffic. The air suddenly seems very dead and still. This is very upsetting. But he keeps driving, And finally he sees a sign for a town and thinks, oh, at last, civilization. He gets into the town, no people, no animals, no cars, no bicycles, totally devoid of life. Well, finally he gets to where he's going. And the trip from where he started, which should have taken him 3 hours, took him 6 hours to get there. And when he arrives, everything is back to normal. Well, he still can't believe that he had some strange experience, and there has to be a natural explanation for it. So later he goes back and retraces his route, thinking, I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere. But he can't find anything that looks like what he saw. So he starts talking to other truckers, and he finds that they have had weird experiences on the same straight road. So if you are driving on 55, especially going west, do be careful, because you might end up in the Twilight Zone. One of those unexplained stories from West Virginia.
Yeah, I missed Rosemary. She was a sweetheart. She would have definitely been on the show. Super friendly.
My cousin works at a truck stop in Kansas. She told me about this guy who parked his truck and got out, and then a woman got out of the passenger seat. It was kind of cold, so the trucker was wearing a coat and hat, but the woman was wearing summer clothes. My cousin thought not much of it and did her whole hi welcoming thing. The trucker bought a coffee, but the woman just stood there in the doorway. Now my cousin was freaked out. She didn't want to be rude, but she was a teenage girl all alone in a gas station in the middle of nowhere. Excuse me, miss, do you need anything? She asked. Who are you talking to? The truck driver asked when he got to the checkout. The woman who got out of your truck. My cousin pointed, but the woman had disappeared. She told me she had never seen a look of such pure terror on a man's face before. He just whispered a quiet, oh no. He got his coffee and left. The woman did not get back into his truck, and the cousin could not find her in the store afterward. She said it was just one of the most terrifying experiences she had ever had while on that job. And let's see, this one is called Over the Airwaves. I had a friend tell a story that he swears on to this day. He and his girlfriend were making the drive to Naples, Florida, late night on a 2-lane road through the Everglades, and had been in a line of cars behind the 18-wheeler for multiple miles. She fell asleep, and he was surfing for something to listen to on the radio. Only one station came in clearly enough to be tolerable, so he gave it a listen. The DJ came on and said something along the lines of, the stars are extra bright in the Everglades tonight. If you're driving through here, pull off and take a look. He said he normally wouldn't even think of it, but for some reason, he felt compelled to that night. He woke up his girlfriend. She was annoyed and didn't want to, but he convinced her it would be worth it. They stopped and just took in the stars for 5 to 10 minutes. He said it was the most amazing sky he's ever seen. They got back on the road and drove another few minutes. Then they witnessed a horrific sight. They came across a massive accident. The truck they were following had jackknifed and took out a handful of vehicles that were following it. He said there were multiple fatalities. They most likely would have been involved in the crash if not for that random DJ on the only radio station that came in that night.
I've seen some strange things. I was driving one morning at 2 a.m. in the Midwest, and a driver says, see that light? It's there every morning. It's a satellite monitoring us. I said, yeah, okay. I can't explain it, but about a year after my younger brother died, after midnight, driving, I was exhausted and thinking about him, and out of the corner of my eye, I'd see little black bats flying by my right side mirror. I was pretty tired, and this went on occasionally for months. I did see the northern lights one night in northern Ohio. We had some really weird weather patterns going on across the U.S. at the time. Some other driver was from Minnesota and said it's rare to be seen down here. Okay.
I used to work as a field technician in the oil industry, so I spent a lot of time driving through remote areas of Canada at odd hours. One very strange and eerie experience sticks with me. I was driving late at night when I noticed a very large black shape on the road in front of me. Thinking it was a moose, I stepped on the brakes, coming to a stop only a few feet from it. Despite being so close and having my headlight shining directly on it, I still couldn't tell what I was looking at. It was vaguely the shape of a four-legged animal, but very big, probably at least 6 feet tall. Aside from that, it was completely featureless. I couldn't make out any details whatsoever, no shine from its eyes, nothing. But then I noticed something even more terrifying. There were more of them in a ditch on both sides of the road. 5 or 6 of them, maybe more. All the same as the black shape on the road in front of me. None of them were moving. They didn't look like physical objects or living things. More like just large patches of absolute darkness. After I got over my shock, dread started to set in, and I drove around the thing on the road and sped off.
This was back in the early 80s, and I was driving down a country lane when things started to change, like it was getting lighter outside. It shouldn't have been getting lighter because it was only 2 a.m. As I drove, I noticed the light beam begin to narrow and realized that it was directly above my truck. I slowed down to see if I could see the source of the light, but it slowed down too. So I sped up and it sped up. I found a place on the side of the road where I could get my truck and trailer off the road, and I pulled over and shut my truck down. I rolled down my window, but couldn't hear any sound. Not from whatever was making the light or any crickets, nothing. There was just no sound at all, except for my own breathing. I opened my truck door and tried to look up to see where the light was coming from, but all I could see was the light. I climbed down out of my truck and walked across the road, but the light began to follow me. I climbed through the barbed wire fence and began walking across the field, and the light still followed me. That light was determined. I couldn't hear anything, not even my own footsteps. I began to run, and I ran across the field into some woods. The light was still above me. I ran, tripping and stumbling over dead and fallen branches as the light followed me. I fell down, and the light started down to me, and as it got right above me, I felt this. And it ends there. So just make up your own ending on that one.
Well, this one's terrifying. My friend told me a story about riding with his father in his truck as a kid. They were in the middle of nowhere, and they were coming up on a person lying in the road with no one else around, no cars, etc. His dad blew the horn. They didn't move, so he blew it again. As he got closer, they still didn't move, so he did something horrific. He told my friend to put his head down and cover his eyes, and he ran the person over. When they looked back, a bunch of people who were previously hiding were running out of the woods. Basically, his dad had suspected it was a setup for a robbery or worse, and wasn't chancing it with the child in the car. I think about that all the time. That's creepy. I was in the middle of absolutely nowhere in Texas and getting tired. There were absolutely no lights anywhere around me but the stars. I guess I kind of messed up at a turn, one of those forks in the road, because out of nowhere a calm voice came in quite loud over the CB. "Driver, looks like it's time for you to pull over and grab some sleep." So I did. I'm not ignoring invisible CB Jesus. I worked at a Nevada nuclear test site, decommissioning old buildings. One of the creepiest days was when I was sent with a end dump load of non-hazardous material to a landfill, which I had never been to before. Somehow I missed the turn and ended up at an armed gate with machine guns pointed at me. Very uncomfortable. Once I explained my mistake, I was quite hastily turned around, still not knowing exactly where my turn was. I was looking for a very nondescript desert road. I headed back. I turned on the next dirt road I came to and had to take a break. My hands are still shaking from the run-in with the armed guards. So, where do you think that was, fellas? Ooh. My friend was hauling logs in Idaho and was coming down during a snowy winter night. He was putting on chains before heading down a steep hill when he said all of the hair started standing up on his body. It felt like there was something watching him. Halfway down the switchbacks, he saw a large figure standing on a 20-foot tall embankment. As he got closer, it jumped up and down, and the shoulders were as tall as his cab. In a single bound, it leaped down and then leaped over to the other side of the embankment. At the time, he thought it was a Sasquatch. Now, he says it was probably a demon trying to make him crash. He did not stop to remove the chains until he was well away from the mountain.
This one is called the Suspicious Roadkill. I was driving through Montana headed east, and my company had miscalculated my mileage, so I requested an emergency fuel up. I got a response with the nearest gas station that I could get approved at. It wasn't exactly close, so I turned off the main highway and headed toward my stop. It's pitch black, there's no moon, no city light, and I haven't seen any headlights for about an hour. I'm cruising down the highway, and I see something in the middle of the road at the furthest extent of my headlights, so I slow down, naturally, as I approach it. When I come to pass it, I get one good glance at it and slam on my brakes as I pass right in the middle of the highway. All I could think was, what did I just see? So I back up, looking in my mirror until I see its red silhouette in my brake lights. I pull my brakes, put on my jacket, and grab my flashlight and hop out. I walk to the back of the trailer and put my light on it, and there it was. A headless, skinless, mangled corpse. I froze and my jaw dropped. I didn't know what I was looking at. I just stood there in the middle of the highway in the cold, stagnant air. The only sound is the hum of my truck 50 feet back, watching the steam rise from this pile of meat. There was no fur, no clothing, just a fully intact rib cage and a mess of other miscellaneous bones attached by ligaments. I debated calling the police, as the rib cage looked big enough for someone my size, but I looked at my phone and had 0 cell service. The nearest town was about 50 miles out. When I put my phone away, I flashed my light around, and standing at the end of the road were a handful of coyotes staring at me. And then they started coming through the fence and trotting my direction. I figured this is the part where I get back in my truck before I get into a situation, so I did, and I continued on my way. I still to this day do not know if it was a human or not. Whatever it was, and whatever had happened, I was almost a witness of. I convinced myself that it was more than likely a deer, and was hit by another truck like my own at highway speeds. That would definitely do significant damage, but In retrospect, I've never seen roadkill missing its flesh before.
A few years back, I was driving home after a shift. It was 3 or 4 a.m. and I was tired but not exhausted. It's a deserted state route in the middle of nowhere, and it's pretty common not to see a single car during the 30-mile trip. I drive this road multiple times a week as I'm on mostly open fields and some farmland through this 30-mile stretch. This particular night, it was cold, but the sky was clear, like no clouds or anything, and I actually love nights like this because you can see the stars so well without light pollution. Anyway, about halfway back home, I come over this hill to a 2 or 3 mile straight stretch. A huge dark object about the length of a pickup truck, but far rounder and thicker, catches my attention. It's just hovering around 50 feet in the air over a farm field. There's a very bright red light coming out the side or bottom. I couldn't tell exactly where it originated from because it was so bright. As I was going about 50 miles per hour past it, I only had a few seconds to look, but the image is burned in my mind. I have no idea what it was. I wanted to turn around, but I was freaked out. I'm sure alien life exists somewhere, but as far as visiting our planet, I don't know. But if I ever had to paint a picture of what I think a UFO would look like, I'd paint whatever the heck I saw that night. I haven't seen anything that odd over the area since that night, but that was odd enough for a lifetime.
The shapeshifter. Many years ago, I was on a shift called Meet and Turn. This is where the driver that is domiciled. Word of the day. Domiciled. Out of the city will drive a load halfway to its destination, while the other truck driver that meets him halfway and brings the load where it needs to be delivered. I have been doing runs like this for several months, and found out that I had to meet on point an hour before the other driver arrived. It was a dark and empty lot around 3 a.m. So since there was still some time to kill, I decided to close my eyes and take a short nap. About 10 minutes into my nap, I was awakened by a barking dog. I tried to ignore it, but the bark carried on for several minutes and it grew louder and closer. At this point, it became clear that he's either trying to alert me of something, or he's just being a pain in the butt. So I sat up and looked out my window, and what I saw left me motionless. Standing there, inches on this other side of the glass, was a man around 35 years of age. He was a large fellow, and he was barking at me. His eyes were crazy, and he was even frothing a little from his mouth. The sheer creepiness struck me, and gently, without making any sudden movements, I reached down and started my truck and slowly started pulling away. As I was doing so, he was chasing me, much like you would expect an angry dog. He was still barking as I kept pulling away. Needless to say, I don't take naps on the job anymore.
So you want to be a truck driver? One trucker was on his nightly delivery route when suddenly he saw a huge figure flying straight towards him. Fearing a collision with the windshield, the driver ducked below the dash. As he did, he heard a loud thud above the cab of the truck. He slammed on the brakes and got out to see what he had hit. Behind the truck, he saw a man-sized figure laying at the side of the road. He walked over when suddenly it jumped on 2 legs and flew off. Panicking, the driver ran back to the truck and drove to the next gas station before stopping to examine the damage. The creature had left bat-shaped wing prints, 6 feet across. Oh, let's pull over here and hear the story about black-eyed children. This tale begins when a trucker has pulled into a rest stop and is setting up his sleeper cab for the night. He hears small footsteps approaching his truck, followed by a knock on his door. Upon opening the door, he sees 2 small children who say, "Our parents will be home soon. Can we stay with you until they arrive?" The driver agrees but feels a sense of fear. He notices, when he peers at the children's faces, that their eyes are completely black. After some time, a light appears in the distance, and the children excitedly exclaim that their parents have arrived. The light grows brighter and brighter until it's blinding to the driver, whereupon the children suddenly disappear and the light blinks out.
This one's called The Fog. I was driving for Costco a few years back. It was around this time of year, which could have been any time because there's no date. We usually took extra toy shipments to various locations due to the holiday season. Hey, I think it was near Christmas. We got a call that one of our locations in rural Kentucky needed to restock their giant Spider-Man dolls. They knew I was a fast driver, so I was given the last minute late night duty. I loaded my truck and headed out on the 265. It was around 3 a.m. when I started to have an eerie feeling. I chalked it up as being tired and popped a couple of no-dos. About 15 minutes later, the road started to fog up, more so than any other time before or since. It got to the point where I had to pull off on the side of the road and wait. There weren't any other cars on the road, and I was ahead of time, so I figured I could wait here until it cleared up a bit. About 5 minutes of sitting still in silence, my truck goes dead. No lights, no engine, nothing. I tried my CB, but I can't get anyone on it. I checked my cell phone, and there's no signal. As I'm sitting there contemplating my next move, I hear what sounds like a child crying. It slowly morphed into a woman crying, or at least that's what it sounded like to me. Now, I'm a big man, 6'3" and 250 pounds, but I refused to exit my cab. I did roll down my window and ask if anybody needed help, and at that point the crying stopped. Then I heard what sounded like a sinister laugh. At that point, I felt like the laughter was directed at me. I rolled my window up, and it seemed like the more scared I became, the louder the laugh went. And then, as soon as it started, it stopped. And just like that, my truck started back up and the fog dissipated. I drove out of there and got to the next truck stop and pulled in. I ran into the bathroom and poured water on my face and asked myself, did that really just happen? I don't know, did it?
This one is called The Dark Beast. I was working the overnight shift from Friday night into Saturday morning at a gas station. At about 6 a.m., a semi pulls into the fuel aisle. The driver gets out and almost runs into the store, clearly shaken. His face is completely white and he is obviously upset. My first thought was, this poor man had hit something in the road, since we get a lot of people walking across the 4-lane highway in front of the store. So I ask, what's wrong? He looks at me for a second and is like, I'm not crazy. Now I'm thinking, great, I'm here all alone and this guy is losing it. I say, of course not. I just saw something huge on the side of the road. Like a deer or a bear. We had a bear get in the dumpster last week. No, bigger than a bear on its back legs. Maybe a big person? It picked up a dead buck on the side of the road and carried it over its shoulder into the woods. I can only stare at him. My brain cannot deal with this information this late in a shift. A local comes up to the counter and gets his usual, and the guy tells him the story too. The local says, oh, that's the Bigfoot that lives near the county line. The truck driver and I are both looking at this guy like he has two heads. He has to be joking. This trucker pays for his fuel at record speed and leaves, never to be seen again. The local still insists it's Bigfoot. I just don't go into the woods now because I don't know.
Well, that's about all the creepy truck driver stories we have for you. We'll be back again next week with another road trip. Thanks as always to Jimmy Haunted. You're awesome. God bless you guys, and see ya. An encounter with an
A rude awakening. I think the worst creepy feeling that ever happened to me was when I was headed from Arizona to Utah. This was a few years ago, and the main highway had been taken out in a flash flood. It was under construction, so I had to take this weird detour through the mountains in lower Utah. It was getting late, and I was getting tired, so I pulled off onto the shoulder and went to sleep in my bunk. Now, this was in the middle of nowhere. The closest town was 40 miles away, so it was completely pitch black outside once I turned the lights off. Around 4 a.m., I wake up because I'm hearing something messing with my truck, like playing with the air and power cables between my cab and the trailer, which is literally 6 inches from where my head is on the outside of the cab. When I feel something climb onto the landing that's on the back of my truck, it shakes my whole truck. So I'm guessing something around 200 pounds was climbing around back there. I'm thinking maybe a mountain lion or a bear. At this point, I'm wide awake, and I want to get this thing away from me, so I slam my hand onto the cab wall, trying to scare whatever's out there. The response made me jump out of my skin. I heard someone, a male, scream, and I hear them fall off the back of my truck. I then hear about 15 other people all around my truck yelling. I climb up front, turn on my lights, and illuminate a squad of Army reserves doing their midnight march and capture drills. Turns out these guys are just supposed to find an abandoned truck and secure it for their midnight drills. That truck was 3 miles back down the road. They were not expecting me to be sleeping there, and though I was part of their drill, I'm ex-military, so after explaining I was not part of their test, and it was just a coincidence, we laughed it off. They had to radio to the commanding officer and tell him not to have the other squads bother me. Damn, I thought this would be another Bigfoot.